So, maybe you want to say something about your work here.
Yeah, sure. We've got 10 pieces in this show, our Elements show, that's been on for the last couple weeks. Everything I've brought is watercolor, which is predominantly the medium that I prefer to use. I find the fluidity and the organic nature of it to work really well for the subject matter that I prefer, which is definitely Pacific Northwest in nature. It's where I've spent almost all of my life, with the exception of about 4 years in Ontario. I grew up in Victoria and now living over here on the mainland. There's little bits and pieces that, I go back to Goldstream in Victoria, and when I visit places like the North Shore in Vancouver, it brings me back to those places and the greens of the forests in BC and kind of the misty nature when it's early in the morning.
So you were mentioning you're from Vancouver Island.
Yeah, I was born in Victoria and lived there for about over 30 years until we moved to Ontario for a career opportunity for my wife.
Uh-huh. Your work has almost a photographic quality to it. Do you work with photography as well?
So yeah, I think that does not come by accident at all. Actually, I was a professional photographer for about 10 years.
Oh.
So I come by a photographic look, I think, pretty honestly.
So are you working from photography, or are you working in the field?
Everything that I paint, I've been there. Well, I would say it's probably somewhere between half and half, where I'll try to paint on location, or if I know it's going to be a bigger piece and I wouldn't be able to complete it there, I do work a lot in sketchbooks, and I just will create a rough sketch of what I'm looking at, try to get an idea of the colors that I'm feeling at the time that I'm there, so that when I do get to a larger work or version of that sketch, I have that sense of place. And then, with, like, say, a painting like this is in Oregon, Cape Lookout in Oregon, from a camping trip that I went on with my family. And everybody in my house, except for me, sleeps in. So I get up and search out coffee and go down to the beach. And it was just beautiful and quiet, and that sense of solitude. And it wasn't until after I'd been there, largely had the beach to myself, except for some seagulls and whatnot. And I kind of looked over, and there was a couple other people that were just out meandering about. And I just kind of liked that whole sense of just being there, and then slowly having other people come along.
Yeah, because these figures, this painting is very much about these two people, huh? Out there in the lonely fog.
Yeah, it's big, and it's just it's quiet. And this is really, for me, where watercolor shines in its ability to, moisture value works into itself. I mean, I can't do some of these things with a brush. That's the
Right.
medium into the medium, and then you just have to kind of leave it alone.
It's almost water representing water, doing what water does.
Which is like perfect for something like this. And it's a long time I was making paintings, and I'd look at them and it's like, I hate this, I don't like this, why don't I like this? And then why do I not like what I'm doing? And why do I love what someone else has done? And ultimately what it came down for me was shape, value, and texture. And is definitely an emphasis in a lot of the stuff that I try to paint. But I think this one really, for me, speaks to that, because I'm able to, deal with some very obvious shapes in the painting and deal with some value changes throughout the painting to kind of, represent the scene. It's really, everything is just a combination of shapes. But then just with the texture that I can get from the medium itself, and then also by changing the moisture values on that medium, taking advantage of the texture that's also available to me in the surface of the paper that I choose. So I can use like a rough textured paper, and it just facilitates a nice broken stroke across an area that the viewer might read as specular highlights or whatnot.
Mm-hmm. So you're working with these materials like the paper, watercolor. Is that your main materials that you're working with?
Yeah. I mean, the drawing, graphite, obviously is a big part of it as well. But when it comes to something like this, there's really not a lot of drawing going on. But painting-wise, it's just watercolor and brushes and paper. The three main things that I'm concerned with when I'm working. I have done some works with acrylic, but it tends to look very different. I have access to maybe more vibrant colors, and I can fix things. I can control more to an extent, which is, I think, is why I do tend to prefer the watercolor. I think that lack of control, it's a little healthier for me to come to terms with that and let it go. So in a sense, it's pretty therapeutic.
That's interesting. It's almost a paradox that, I mean, you're working with water, and there's some the almost randomness of how the water flows right on the work. Like even like you look at these details in the clouds, and yet you're respecting quite a high degree of realism. They're beautiful representations, as well as showing that wonderful random aspect of how water flows on the paper. And
Yep. And I like to paint loose too, so there will be times where I'll just pick it right up, and you just get to move the board and see the paint shift around and go, and then the science of it is also kind of fascinating too, because you're dealing with pigments, some of them very natural, some of them very synthetic, and certain pigments that you put into an area, it's like when you see a droplet of food coloring go into the glass. I can put certain pigments into an area and it will just bloom. Like in here, this green that I use it's a combination of a couple pigments, but the yellow in it is very synthetic and very active. So if I have like a little wash around an area and I put this color into it, you just watch it go, and you kind of sit back and see how it's going to contribute to, say, that foundation layer of a painting. And sometimes it works and does what you might envision, and sometimes it requires you to reassess what you're going to be doing going forward. You may shift some things around a little bit, and that's kind of a fun part of it as well.
Some of them are more monochromatic, and some of them are more colorful. Like in this one, your palette is extremely. It's almost like an ink wash, or.
Yeah, it's only one color, one paint that I used for that entire one. It was just more of an exploration in value, and the watercolor itself, moisture levels, and seeing what I could kind of get away with. So a mixture of kind of just very abstract wet techniques, kind of I don't know what the word I would use, but then moving through the kind of break point in the composition, going to very obvious dry brush work. balance of the two.
And nice, the light peeking through the horizon like that.
And that's very West Coasty.
Yeah.
You just get that sea mist that just seems to create this layer of light that sits around.
And this one too, just that faint use of the those greenish tones up there in the misty forest. That's quite nice.
Yeah, and I'm a sucker for purple with green too. So I just kind of felt like a little lavender tone really actually brings that green out almost a little bit more. And this is done similarly to this painting, and approaching it with one value and really trying to focus on the light in the forest at the time. But yeah, just adding that little splash of color makes a big difference.
Now this eagle, extremely dynamic, very, very different from the others.
I do a lot of birds. I only chose to put one in this show. Yeah, I tried to, in a similar manner to a couple of paintings that we looked at already, I don't try to define and do hyper-realism in the birds that I like to paint. The only real area that I tend to kind of focus in on is just some detail around the face, and then the rest of it I'll try to deal with layering, value, shape, and texture created by the intermixing of pigments to create the idea of the plumage. And that's pretty consistent with most of the birds that I'll work on. Sometimes getting even looser, and sometimes not dealing with a lot of the motion of the paint, say down and back past the tail and the talons. And very rarely will I do anything other than have them just on plain white. My interest is solely in the shape and form of the bird, not necessarily its relationship to the environment around it. Yeah. But I don't really know what to say about them. I kind of fancy birds. What can I say?
And here you have a lone beach visitor.
Mm-hmm. So this is Crescent Beach. So we moved here almost 4 years ago. And you know, in trying to acclimate to a new area, you do some exploration, and Crescent Beach was one of the first places that my wife and I went to. And you come out on the street and there's this beautiful beach, and it's completely unfamiliar to us because this is a new area to explore in Greater Vancouver. Having grown up on the island, I would come over to Vancouver quite a bit. And as much as I really, I mean, you can't deny it, the sunsets from Crescent Beach are beautiful, and I tried to kind of capture that here. But for me, this beach is really neat because even though I hadn't been to this beach very often, right across the way is an area of land that I've been familiar with since I was a kid, because this whole stretch of land is on which the highway I would take to go into Vancouver all the time. So I'd be like, oh, I see that, and I know that the ferry terminal's there, and then that leads to home, and then that connects to experiences I've had in the city. So there's this really neat familiarity in a very new place. So I kind of like that. So I don't know. Now that I think about that, maybe this might be why there's only one person in there. And you think about all these memories when you have when you're a kid.
So that person is you.
Maybe. Or maybe I'm the seagull. I don't know.